and Judy a retired dentist. Aubrey got his navigation experience with his watch-keeping certificate with the Royal Canadian Navy. He was also a clearance diving officer. Aubrey is a past Commodore of the Toronto Hydroplane and Sailing Club. Judy got her navigation experience with the Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons, from which she has a full certificate, meaning she has completed every course offered by the squadron. She has also been an instructor for the Toronto Squadron for many years before setting off to sail in 1998. Aubrey and Judy have been full-time live-aboard on their Ontario 32, Veleda 4, since 1998. Veleda has been back to Ontario only once during those 19 years. The past few years, they've been cruising the west coast from BC to Alaska. Last fall, they sailed down the Baja and the Sea of Cortez. Veleda is currently on the Hard in San Carlos, Mexico. Today, the Millards will be talking about their passage from Alert, north of Vancouver Island, through the picturesque fjords and ghost towns of the BC coast. They will then take us on up to Alaska to Ketchikan, Juneau, and Glacier Bay, where they anchored off and walked on one of the glaciers. They have dramatic pictures of waterfalls, glaciers, and wildlife, including eagles, whales, sea lions, and the colorful puffins. Please give Judy and Aubrey a warm shellback welcome.
Thank you very much, man. Can you hear me without using the mic okay?
No.
Okay, I'll utilize the mic a bit. Anyway, I'm happy to be here, and Judy has been able to accompany me on these, and she always corrects me when I'm making any errors in what I'm saying.
Somebody's got to keep it straight.
So anyway, this is our boat, Veleda 4. I think many of you have seen my presentation before, and you know a little bit about it. It's an Ontario 32. We have been living on it for 19 years, full-time. Just this year, we have stopped our full-time live-aboard, and we have taken an apartment up in Elliott Lake. So we're good little snowbirds where we'll be up at Elliott Lake for 6 months a year, and then down on our sailboat for 6 months a year. We had to do that to please OHIP. They found out that we were out of the country for more than 6 months and cut off our OHIP. So we had to come back and be legitimate. Anyhow, it's an Ontario 32. It's a good seaboat. We've taken it across the Atlantic and across the North Sea, the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Caribbean, and all of that. And we'll take it any place in the world. Right now, we'll probably restrict ourselves to coastal sailing. The boat would take it if we wanted to go across the Pacific, but
Veleda would take it. I don't think I would. I get seasick. What can I say?
so it's an Ontario 32, and our home club is the Toronto Hydroplane and Sail Club. And we have our website is www.veleda.ca. If you want to do some armchair traveling, I have over 500 logs of our travels since 1998 with pictures. So it would be a nice way if you want to do a little bit of armchair touring. So this is our boat. We've got a hard bimini that we built ourselves. We have replaced the wind generator as we have put solar panels on the bimini. We have mast steps.
After the second wind generator burned out, we decided to not put a third one in.
We have mast steps going up, but we only put the radar on about 8 years ago. Our crossing of the Atlantic and times in the Mediterranean and Caribbean, we did not have radar. But when we were coming up to the East Coast, we knew, okay, it's time to put radar on. So here we are. This is just showing motor sailing, but I have this so you can see how we tow our dinghy. It's called a dinghy tow system. We figured the boat's too small for a full set of davits, so we have this system. And it's basically a couple of arms on our stern that attach to fastenings on the back of the dinghy. And then we lift the dinghy up by the stern, and only the bow of the dinghy rides in the water. And we've had it that way for years and years. The only time we've taken it off is when we crossed the Atlantic. We did the full length of the Mediterranean and Black Sea and the Caribbean and the full east and west coasts with that dinghy tow system on it. And so it's very easy to lower. We leave the life jackets in it, the fuel tank, and the outboard on it. So it's just a matter of lowering it into the water, detaching, and away we go. We do a lot of anchoring, and we are living aboard, so a dinghy is a very important aspect for us. Incidentally, this picture is taken when we were going up the Bosphorus. That's the Rumeli Fortress in the background as we were going into the Black Sea.
Does anybody recognize this? Motoring cone. We were motor sailing. In Europe, they're a lot more picky about these things. Not that anybody ever stopped us, but we were told they were more picky. So we had our motoring cone up.
The other thing too is that when you're in another country, you fly the flag of that country on your starboard spreader as a courtesy flag. And I had to show you this picture when we were under Spinnaker. Actually, one of the most beautiful points of sail I had a number of years ago, 2009, was our Annus Horribilis. Everything that went wrong did go wrong that particular year, including the fact that we broke the boom when we were down in the Caribbean. And so we were sailing back up the Providence Channel with no mainsail and only the Genoa. And I thought, well, let's see if we can get the Spinnaker out one side and the Genoa out the other side, held out by a whisker pole. And sure enough, we were able to do it. It was a real high point in my sailing. No main, just the Genoa and Spinnaker with downwind sailing. Okay, so this is basically the boat. It's a good sea boat. It's reasonably light at the bow and the stern, so it never buries its bow. We have never been pooped. And the other thing I like about this, two things in particular, is that 45% of the weight of the boat is lead in the keel, which makes it a good stiff sea boat. So we'll take that boat any place in the world. The other thing we like is that the mast is keel stepped. It goes right through to the keel. And at one point in time, we lost a forestay in a force-8 gale. And if it had been a deck step mast, I think it would have gone overboard. As it was strong enough to stay up until I was able to turn downwind, and then we jury-rigged a couple of forestays. Now this is our trip when we came across. We were in the Caribbean. We went back, the boat's been back to Toronto only once in the last 19 years. We then came out the St. Lawrence and down the East Coast. When we were down in Honduras, I wanted to come up to the West Coast. And so our decision was, well, do we go through to Panama or do we ship it? And we elected to ship it. So we went to Houston, Texas, put it on a flatbed truck, and shipped it up to Bellingham, Washington. This way we didn't cross any international borders. We didn't have to worry about the bureaucracy. It's always easier sailing into a country than it is to have a boat go through customs on land. And then we spent the last 4 years playing up and down the BC coast. And so what we're going to be talking about today is our trip from the northern tip of Vancouver Island up to Glacier Bay. Last fall, we then came and we sailed down the west coast and around the Baja and up into the Sea of Cortez. And at present, our boat is about this location on the mainland coast of Mexico in a place called San Carlos. I think that area has been avoiding the couple of hurricanes that's gone through Mexico and also the earthquakes that they've had.
I look at the NOAA hurricane website every morning to make sure that, not that we could do anything anyway, but just to make sure that we're clear. So far, everything's been fine where she is.
When we were going into one of the marinas there, we saw the results of a hurricane that went through that marina a few years ago. And we said, we don't want to put our boat in that marina for the winter while we are up here in Ontario, for the summer while we're up here. Those boats have been at that angle for the last several years. So I was a bit leery about it. But in San Carlos, we like the setup we've got. And this is the way they haul the boats up. They've got a long trailer that goes down and hauls the boat up. We don't have to worry about taking the mast down or anything of that nature. And then this trailer takes the boat, and the trailer is going to take the boat down this highway and over into a hard stand over here. So it's over a mile away from the water, and we think that that's a good, safe location. In addition to that, though, we have these hurricane posts, steel posts that are on both sides of the boat. And the posts have arms that go over and support the boat. in addition to the hard stands that they've got. So that even if the boat next to us was to collapse, it would not be able to come down onto our boat. So we consider that to be as safe a system of being on the hard in hurricane zones or in earthquake zones as we could find. This is how we then had it shipped across to Bellingham, Washington. It was put on this flatbed truck and shipped across. When we got up to Bellingham, there are a couple of beautiful sailing areas down the southern part of Vancouver Island, the American San Juan Islands and the Canadian Gulf Islands. And they are beautiful islands like this. I like this particular picture because of these arbutus trees that have that beautiful golden red bark on them. But this is the kind of scenery that you'll have in the Gulf Islands and the San Juan Islands off the southern coast of Vancouver Island. And this one is the Sydney Spit, and this extends out over a mile into the water at low tide. At high tide, most of it is covered. So that it is a beautiful sailing area, that part of the world, but there are too many people. Judy and I like isolation, so we headed north. On the way, though, we dropped into Howe Sound, and we saw HMCS Annapolis alongside. And it was being prepared by the British Columbia Artificial Reef Society to be sunk as an artificial reef. And politics raised its head, and some of the cottagers in the area postponed and created all kinds of environmental issues to try to stop or prevent it from being sunk. However, it has been clarified, and so the boat is now down underwater in one of the bays off, which island was it, Judy?
Gambier Island.
Gambier Island.
And it's down as an artificial reef. One of about 7 or 8 in BC that have been sunk. And the earlier ones have all proved to be very good diving locations and very productive habitat.
I had a chance to actually go on board it while it was in this situation, and the people who were coordinating it had a chance and took me through it. So I had a chance to see the boat as it was totally gutted before it was sunk.
Yeah, and all of the tankage was steam cleaned, and any asbestos was removed, and that unless people are going to start really complaining about the fact that there might be steel down there, there's not much environmental damage, and it was being put down in an area where there wasn't much on the bottom. So these ships provide excellent reefs.
Judy, will you plug the computer in? I guess it's probably plugged in. There's a plug in right there.
Yes, where's one moment. Brief delay here. You're right, you didn't plug it in.
Yes, dear.
I didn't plug it in either. Neither of us plugged it in. I just have to learn to turn it on.
That's why you're together on a boat after 1 year.
That's right, the 2 magic words.
Those are 2 words.
There you are.
Okay, so what we're doing today then, we're going to go from the northern tip of Vancouver Island up through these beautiful fjords. The 3 most beautiful sailing areas in the world, cruising areas as far as we're concerned, are the north shore of Lake Huron, called the North Channel, the north shore of Lake Superior, and the BC and Alaskan coast. Of all the sailing areas in the world we've been to, for as far as we're concerned, those are our favorite cruising areas.
Those are Aubrey's favorite
Judy,
cruises.
what happened
I
to-
like being
Judy?
warmer. I like the Bahamas, but that's me. I don't know. Let me take a look at it. I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
Press the start button.
Projector?
Well, while Judy's trying to get that organized, we went up from Alert Bay, which is an island just off the northern tip of Vancouver Island, which has a large native community, and we saw one of these horrendous residential schools that was in that community.
Sorry.
And that community had to decide, do we keep the school here or do we destroy it and clear it out? And they opted to destroy it and clear it out. And from there, we then went over to a place called Port McNeill, which is right on the northern tip of Vancouver Island. So here we are, this is in Alert Bay. This is a totem park that they have. And we have seen quite a few totem poles in our travels up there. We did go to Haida Gwaii, and I understand you're going to have a talk on Haida Gwaii in the near future, so that we're not going to talk about Haida Gwaii that we went to this time round. But this is the residential school, and as I say, when we were there, the big discussion was, do they keep it as a monument or a memorial to the residential school system, or do they get rid of it? And they have elected to get rid of it, so that school is no longer there.
When we were there were all these placards up talking about the school, and I have to say that before this visit, I had a very different impression of residential schools than I now do. I went to Branksome Hall here in Toronto, which was a school that had a lot of boarding students living in residence. When I heard residential school, I thought boarding school, it's a school. Yes, people are living there. Yes, some of them are missing their families, but it's a school. These were not schools. Some of them may have been. What these were training locations to teach people how to be gardeners and laundry maids. They were not schools. At least this school, from what we were told from the information there and the people who have been at it, and I think the same thing applies to many of them. Not all, I'm sure there were some that were trying to provide education. But a vast number of the schools for the Native students were designed to turn them into servants, not into functioning members of society.
Okay, so we went up to a town called Port McNeill, and they had a logging festival while we were there. And so we had a chance to watch these people in the competitions to see how fast they could cut through with a crosscut saw a thick piece of lumber. And then they had axe throwing. This lady was quite good. She was very accurate in her ability to fire that axe at the target. I wouldn't want to mess with her. And then this is another interesting one. This is the way they originally used to fell trees. They would cut a sliver into the bark, and then they would put this springboard on it, and then they would stand up on the springboard and then start cutting the tree down.
The reason being that at ground level, the tree might have a 30-foot circumference. 8 feet above the ground, it would have a 20-foot circumference. If they could cut it off higher up, they cut through it, in half the time for very little sacrifice of the gained lumber. And it was a vast increase in efficiency.
So going through the forest, you'll see the stumps, and the stumps are anywhere from 8 to 10 feet high. And then just below the stump, you'll see one of these little slots where they had used the springboard to be able to cut it. And these guys had to be fairly agile to be on top of that and see how fast they could cut through it with a chainsaw. Then we went on up north of Vancouver Island, and I saw a couple of these lumber camps.
This is modern logging, not the hand stuff that we were just seeing.
So this was a lumber camp, and I was very interested, and so I went alongside, and they were quite hospitable. And they allowed me to watch it. I couldn't go up into the area where they are actually doing the cutting, but what they did is that they would cut all the lumber, timber, and then they would haul it down on these trucks. And then when the truck got down to the base, they would put wire wrappings around it and then tip the whole bundle into the water. And then these bundles would be accumulated, and when enough were gathered, they would take and tow them down in large rafts down to the lumber mill. So you had a large raft like that, acres and acres of lumber that would be towed down. Or in some cases, they would put them on a barge and tow the barge down with them. Some of them coming from the lumber mills would depend upon what the lumber was being used for. And so here is the sawdust that was being brought down. Then another thing we were interested in environmentally were fish farms. And I find myself critical of fish farms more so than the lumber industry. The lumber industry, say at least places that they take the lumber will regenerate itself without replanting within 10 to 20 years. So that nature will take care of itself. But fish farms, I think, are far more detrimental because of some of the pollutions and other problems associated with it. Plus the fact they set up in beautiful little coves where it would be lovely to anchor, but they want a nice sheltered, protected cove too. And so as a result, they are taking over more and more areas that would be very good for anchoring. But these are acres and acres of fish farms and fish pens and creating a few interesting variables. Alaska does not have fish farms. BC does, which is unfortunate, and it's killing the wild fish industry in BC. For example, there are the number of fish farms just around Vancouver Island, and there are even more as you grow further north. So the fish farm industry has a real stranglehold on the BC government, and they are very powerful. Now we're getting into some ghost towns. This is a ghost town now called Namu, and it was a fishing village and provided services for the local fishermen who would then be able to resupply and leave their catches there. However, the industry has changed, and so this was a community of about 500 people year-round, and all the local fishermen were able to use it as a resupply spot and to have their catch taken ashore and get more ice and all that. Now it's a totally deserted spot. I think there are a couple of families there. They tried to have it alive so that they could use some of the dock areas for cruisers like us.
Not in Namu. Namu is empty.
Just here. So that anyway, you can see the kind of deserted dock areas that they had. And the concern that I have is that this area is an environmental disaster waiting to happen. Up where we are in Elliott Lake, all the mines that have closed down have cleared out all locations of the mine. You don't see any mine shafts, you don't see any old buildings. Everything has been cleared out and it's reforesting itself. Here, nothing has been done. This is just sitting here collapsing into the situation, including a lot of equipment like that. These are some of the houses that people were living in while we were there. Had to be, of course, totally deserted.
Had been living in, this is how they are now.
And this was their resupply store. Again, just evacuated and deserted. Including all the equipment that was left in here, their generators and things of that nature. But the thing that really got me about it, all of these are containing turpentine, diesel, oils, and other things. And as these will start to deteriorate, it's going to be an environmental disaster up there. And it's just waiting to happen, and I don't know what the government is doing about it. The government, I'm sure, is aware of it, but to do that cleanup would be very expensive. This is another deserted town. This is a town called Ocean Falls. Again, population of 5,000 or 500 to 1,000 people. You know, they had an 8-story apartment building there at one point in time, and it was for fishing and lumbering, and then there's also a hydroelectric dam. The hydroelectric dam is still operational, and there are maybe a half dozen people who live in this community year-round. But as I say originally, it was a thriving community for many years. When I say many years, I'm talking 75 to 100 years. But it had to close down about 20 years ago. And this was the museum. There are several communities along the British Columbia coast that had hangars for the RCAF flying boats during World War II to monitor the British Columbia coastline. And after World War II, all of these hangars were then turned over by the government, and some people bought them, some communities bought them, some places they just disintegrated. So this is an old hangar that the local guy, let's go, almost normal Norman. Yeah, he used to live there most of his life, and so he has kept alive the memory of that community as a small town. And so we had all of this material there. So this is almost normal Norman and I And he's written up in the pilot books, and he's been there for years and years, and glad to show people what it was like originally there. But again, the place is totally deserted. This is about the only viable thing. This is an adventure camping setup that operates during the summer years, but during the winter, nobody's around. This building is totally abandoned. And this is the inside, this is the atrium of that big apartment building. Actually, it was a hotel, wasn't it, Judy? I'm not sure.
I think it was apartments, but I'm not, you went in and I didn't. I don't
Now,
know.
some of the houses have totally disintegrated. Others of them still have a certain amount of structure. And I think there are a couple of houses there that are not too bad a shape, and people come up and use them as summer holiday places. There is a fairly active fishing community there, and a lot of people do sports fishing out of this place called Ocean Falls. Another one, this is Buttedale. And again, it was a smaller community, but it is now abandoned. I think there's a family trying to keep the port or the piers here alive so that cruisers such as ourselves could come and stay there overnight. Because anchoring up in this part of the world is very difficult because it's very steep-sided slopes and very deep. So, 10 feet off the edge of a cliff, you're still going to be in 100 or 200 feet of water. Because if the cliff comes down, it keeps you down underneath the water. So that anchorages out there are few and far between. When you find them, they're nice, but there was about, what was it, 50 kilometers between where we saw it and here?
About 40 miles
Yeah.
each side before the.
But
There was a mediocre spot about 15 miles from there where we did stay, not knowing that Buttedale was much.
But this is the way that village is deteriorating into nothingness. However, we saw a few whales while we were there, and you can always tell whales. You can see here there's a bit of a spume or a spout of the whale. And quite often you can tell a whale because you see that spume, or you hear it, or in some cases if you're close enough you can smell it. And so this is a humpback whale coming up to the surface. And he's getting ready to dive, and he's going down for a deep dive. We've had a couple of whales come fairly close. When I say close, I'm talking about 40 or 50 feet off our bow. And I was just hoping that I didn't alienate the poor guy and he's going to come and attack me, because often these whales are bigger than my boat. And then we love these sea otters. They will go along lying on their back, and something that they found is that they use their forward paws and they will get rocks to break clamshells. They are a tool using animals. Now, this is the kind of fjord-infested area that is beautiful as far as I'm concerned. And so these are different spots that we've gone up in here. We went over, crossed through this channel here, and in this channel alone, I saw 2 large fishing farms in this channel up in northern BC. This route here, and especially the inner route, is the route that the cruise ships take when they're doing the inside passage. And so it provides some spectacular country and vistas for that. And we went into and up this long fjord here. Now the interesting thing is when you're going into these fjords, they are often dead-end fjords. And you've got sizable currents there. You've still got 18 to 20-foot currents.
Tides.
Well, tide. And so when you think of the amount of water, the volume of water that's going to have to go into that fjord and out of that fjord to raise the water 18 feet and lower it 18 feet, you're going to have some fantastic currents at the entrances to these things. And so you have to watch to make sure that you're going in with the right current and at the right time of tide. So the best is usually to go when the tide is going with you. And these are the kind of, when I said steep hills, you can just see, imagine trying to anchor anywhere around those cliffs. But it is beautiful, spectacular country. And again, this was taken in the summertime, but you still have snow-clad mountains in the background. I hope you appreciated the pictures that I showed beforehand. They were just miscellaneous pictures of the BC coast that I thought it would be interesting for you to see while we were having lunch. Now, we just came through this particular channel. You can see the white water there as we're coming through into this one. What was the name of this one?
That was Culpeper Lagoon.
Culpeper Lagoon. Beautiful long lagoon, you know, 2 or 3 miles long and about a mile or so wide. But again, you're going to have currents at the entrance to that lagoon with the tidal shift.
At extreme low tide, that entrance is dry. Well, it's
Yeah, there'd be rocks
soggy,
there
but,
and there at low
it's certainly
tide.
not passable.
Okay, so if you, at low tide, if you've got a rock showing or a rock 1 or 2 feet below the surface, at high tide, it's going to be 12 or 14 feet below the surface. So you can go over it at high tide if the tide's going the right direction that you want to go. So here we are down at the end. We found a spot to anchor because there's a small stream coming in here. So we were able to anchor down at the far end of this lagoon. Beautiful spot, idyllic. However, we had this big tree, this big spruce tree was loose and it drifted down in the tide. And we were hoping that it wasn't going to cross our anchor bow.
It wasn't there when we anchored, but at the next change of tide, it was.
So
And
we were a
actually
bit
literally
concerned.
fending it off.
Yeah, we did fend it off at one point in time. And the next morning, it wasn't there, we couldn't see it. So it moved throughout the whole lagoon, that size of a spruce tree. And so this was one of the small creeks that we went up to. Again, at high tide, you can go farther up. So we went a couple of kilometers up this with our dinghy. We enjoy dinghying around. That's why for us, having a good dinghy is very important. We've got a hard bottom, a rigid bottom dinghy with a 15 horsepower Yamaha outboard on it. Okay, so here we are getting ready to go. This is the entrance up here, and here's Judy up forward. She does the work with on the anchor. We've got an anchor woodless, so it's just a matter of her pressing a button, but she does the anchoring up there. Oh, here's another spot where we were anchored. At high tide, you could take a dinghy up through there. At low tide, you've got the waterfall coming down from that lagoon. And of course, I wouldn't try to take a boat, a large sailboat up into that area. This shows you the going through one of those narrow channels, and that's at high tide. And then you can just see the amount of turbulence that's there. So you've got to know what's the depth, what the tide is when you're going through any of these areas. We did go up at this one with our dinghy at high tide. Now, we were into, what was it, Naquano Rapids, was it?
Naquato Rapids.
Naquato Rapids. We were going into it, and we saw this thing down in the middle of the channel, because we were planning to go through this, because there are 3 large fjords up beyond that set of narrows. But I couldn't figure out what this was in the middle of the channel. There was nothing on our chart to indicate that there was a rock there or anything. And what it was a guy who just miscalculated. And he had total capsized. Here's Veleda. We anchored up here, and I came down on my dinghy. And there was so much flotsam around that we weren't sure when this boat capsized. Was there anybody there, or was it just occurred in the last day or so? Because there's nothing for miles around here.